There's a mystery in FNAF that we don't talk about, and as contradictory as it may sound, it has to do with the vengeful spirit. Now, I'm well aware that the vengeful spirit is one of the biggest topics of discussion in the fandom. Who was he? How he died? When he died? The properties of his possession? All of these questions have been debated into the earth. Yet mine is far simpler, and one that has been ignored, at least for many years now. You see, the colloquial title of Vengeful Spirit is not the diegetic name of this entity. They are never canonically referred to as the Vengeful Spirit in a FNAF game. They are exclusively called the one you should not have killed. This raises my question, the one that's been eating at the back of my mind for years. What makes them the one you should not have killed? What makes them different? What makes them so special? Of all of William Afton's numerous victims, why is the vengeful spirit distinguished as being the one that should have avoided their fate? Hi, I'm Nick. Despite this exact question being overlooked, there have been some indirect explanations over the years. Many come from the identity, for which there are three major candidates. The most well-known would be Cassidy, a unique character made solely to be the MCI victim in Golden Freddy and TOYSHNK. This belief comes from the Fazbear Fright story The New Kid, which implies that Andrew, these books' equivalent to the vengeful spirit, dies in this way. This is further supported by Chica the High School Years, which shows Chica using particularly violent methods for her last kill.
I'll just wait for him after school, throw a bag over his head, hit him with a shovel, and drag him into the back of my car.
Therefore, this agonizing death would grant Cassidy the power and vengeful temperament that would make them unique. The next most common victim would be the bite victim from FNAF 4. This mostly comes from the characters that BV is connected to. He's obviously heavily associated with Golden Freddy, to the point that a significant portion of people who believe in Cassidy TOYSHNK still believe that BV also possesses Golden Freddy under the Golden Duo theory. Furthermore, BV is very clearly connected to Dreadbear. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC is set in 1983, at a location that is very similar to the FNAF 4 house, and has multiple allusions to the Bite of 83. Dreadbear itself is a variation of Fredbear, the animatronic perpetrator of the bite. Dreadbear also lacks a brain. One of the mini-games of this DLC is all about reconstructing the brain of Dreadbear, putting it back together, so to speak. These connections to Dreadbear are relevant because in the Game Over screen of this DLC, we see Dreadbear standing over 9 gravestones, all behind metal bars, one of which is glitchy and purple. This appears to be a representation of UCN, as it's implied that TOYSHNK has forcefully imprisoned other spirits alongside William for the sake of creating this purgatory.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped, or is it you? Perhaps it is us both.
The glitching purple gravestone likely represents William himself. The problem with BV TOYSHNK comes from one small issue. William didn't kill bite victim. BV's death was an accident, and if any individual could be blamed for it, it would be Mike, not his father. The explanation for this goes two ways. One is simply pinning it on William's negligence, saying he should have paid better attention to his kids or made the animatronic safer so that it would have never happened. The other, and arguably more common, is that BV didn't actually die on the spot from the bite, and was instead only gravely injured. From there, William would carry out horrific experiments on him, not unlike what we see with Dreadbear, all in an attempt to put his son back together. In the end, he would fail, and BV would die. The agony of these experiments would result in the vengeful spirit we're all familiar with. So we have Cassidy, a character with no real development or relevance outside of a name. And then we have Bite Victim, a character that definitionally doesn't fit the title of TOYSHNK in the first place. Many weren't satisfied with either answer, so they kept looking, and another answer they would find in the latest game of the franchise. David Murray, to me, offers the most narratively satisfying explanation, yet has the weakest foundation of evidence. I say this because David TOYSHNK, similar to VV TOYSHNK, is built upon multiple other theories with varying degrees of evidence. The main point of contention is the death of David Murray. In the books, his death is an accident. He's hit by a car while chasing his ball out into a road. And in the games, it's similarly implied that David died in an accident, with his playground having been built next to a dangerous shipping yard. There's also evidence that he may have been crushed by the giant moon head in the auditorium. Although I could also see this just being a more abstract representation of his death in the shipping yard, showing that maybe he was crushed by a shipping container that came loose from a hoist during transport, but I digress. For David TOYSHNK to be true, none of those explanations can be. Instead, you're meant to believe that William Afton killed him as a part of his hostile takeover of MCM, the coup de grace, so to speak, that would ultimately break Edwin Murray in his business. David would then be the one you should not have killed because he was William's first victim. There is some evidence with Chica's high school years implying that William had a secret victim before the MCI, as well as the white tiger in the basement of MCN behaving similarly to Golden Freddy. There's also the fact that it fits nicely with the popular theory that Edwin is Old Man Consequences, allowing for an extra layer of tragedy in the interaction between OCM and TOYSHNK in Ultimate Custom Night. Who you believe to be the identity of the TOYSHNK is up to you, but none of them provide a solution to my question that I find satisfying. There's no evidence in the game's timeline that tells us how Cassidy dies. There's minimal evidence in the games that either by victim or David Murray were actually killed by William. What would make any of them the one you should not have killed? Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in their identity at all. There's another TOYSHNK question that's been bugging me. Something so small and inconsequential that no one's bothered to answer it. In the Fazbear Frights books, we get the story The Man in Room 1280, in which the spirit of Andrew, who I've mentioned to be the vengeful spirit of these books, is attached to William Afton's physical body, keeping him alive through conditions that should be frankly unsurvivable, all to torment him. People were quick to draw comparisons between this story and UCN, in which we see the vengeful spirit of the games torturing William Afton. Therefore, most people determine that the vengeful spirit had to have attached itself to William and is presumably keeping him alive to torture him. And here lies my problem. You see, if the vengeful spirit is the Golden Freddy spirit, or at least one of them, how is it then that they became attached to William? How did they get from point A to point B? Well, I think I may have found the answer. But first, I have a few prerequisites. I recently read through most of the Fazbear Frights books for a video, one of which really stood out. You're the Band, the last story in the entire series. It stood out partly because it's the last story. It just feels anticlimactic. It's not a particularly great story, and it doesn't offer a grand emotional send-off, especially when considering the fact that it is immediately preceded by The Scoop, a story that does offer a wonderful reflection on the franchise of FNAF as a whole, as well as a satisfying emotional climax. It just feels like they arbitrarily bumped You're the Band down a spot. But Scott doesn't do coincidences. There has to be a reason that this story is the finale of Fazbear Frights. I think that reason was to emphasize this story, to bring our attention to it because the information within was important. If you want an in-depth summary of the story, you can find it in my Frights video. Here, I'm just going to go over the bits that are relevant to this theory. In the story, a boy named Timmy is given a Freddy Fazbear mask for his birthday. The big reveal is that the mask was not a mask at all, but instead the actual head of the real Freddy animatronic. And when Timmy put it on, the spirit that had been within Freddy latched on to him. The strange behavior was his spirit attempting to take control. This is what was so important. This idea that physical contact, or specifically wearing a haunted animatronic, would allow a physical living person to be possessed. This brings me back to the games. In the FNAF 2 Save Them minigame, we see a set of dead children spread across what appears to be the FNAF 2 pizzeria. Many people believe this to be a separate set of murders from the original MCI that would either possess the toy animatronics or just be left strewn about to get the restaurant closed down. Now, it's a debate in its own right as to whether the DCI is its own set of murders or just an abstract representation of the MCI, but let's assume the DCI did happen. We know know that William did the MCI by luring kids away and killing them while wearing the Spring Bonnie mascot suit. So it's safe to assume that he would do the same for the DCI. This is reinforced by the line in the FNAF 2 phone calls.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it.
But there's one problem. At the time of this game's release, the Spring Bonnie suit didn't exist yet, and there's no evidence that said suit was ever at the FNAF 2 location. But there is one old yellow suit that we know without a doubt was there. A Springlock suit that was brought in for spare parts during the attempted restoration of the withered animatronics, Golden Freddy. This led to the Golden Suit DCI theory, the idea that William Afton didn't have access to All Reliable, so instead used the Golden Freddy suit to commit the DCI. I hope by now that you see where this is going. Assuming that theory is true, we have the answer to our question. When William donned the Golden Freddy suit to commit the DCI, the vengeful spirit that had lied within it latched on to him, ready to seek retribution. In Follow Me, we see that William has to deconstruct all of the Core 4 animatronics for their spirits to be able to freely chase after him, except for one, because it was already free from its suit, already attached to William so that it could personally conduct his suffering. This is why we don't see Golden Freddy after FNAF 2. At least not until UCN, where the vengeful spirit chooses to take on that visage of the suit he once possessed of William Afton's fatal error. And this answers my first question, my biggest question, the one that led me to making this video. What makes the vengeful spirit the one you should not have killed? So much simpler than we ever thought. Their identity, how they died, when they died, none of that matters. Not for this question. You see, they aren't the one you should not have killed because of who they were in life or because of some special abilities they gained in death, but rather what they possessed. It was the suit. It was always the suit. If William had stopped the first 4 MCI victims, he would have never been at risk. But he couldn't. His thirst for blood or knowledge had not been slated. He needed one more, but he was out of suits to hide the bodies in. At least, almost. There were still 2 more. Obviously, he could never taint his beloved Spring Bonnie. He still needed it. There was work left to be done. That left only one, an old yellow suit in the back. That was his mistake. He got greedy. He just had to have one more victim. The one he should not have killed. The only one to be stuffed inside of and possess a Springlock suit. The only one whose spirit sat in a wearable costume. One that could, and eventually would, be worn by William Afton. The only one who had the chance, a gateway to attach itself to Afton. The one that would keep him alive through a Springlock failure, through decades of decomposition, through the fires, also that they could subject William to the very same pain they had caused so many others. Not because they were the only one angry or vengeful or powerful enough to do it, but because they were the only one who had the opportunity. A fact they will remind William of for an eternity. Bye. Also, sorry if the setup is a bit different than usual. I'm home for summer break at the moment, and somehow I think I ended up with a jankier setup than when I record out of my car. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this theory, and if you've ever heard it before. From my research, I wasn't able to find anyone else who's come up with a theory like this, but that's part of why I've been so excited about it, is not only do I think the theory itself is good, but I also think it's pretty original. So I don't know, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Anyways, that's all. Bye for real this time.